And welcome to class 5. 5 out of 8 or 9 or 10 or however many it takes to get her done. So last week we were talking about your life story, class 4. Let's see, we were talking about order, disorder, reorder, about our greatest, one of the quotes, one of the greatest and most important problems of life are insolvable. So we must outgrow them, Carl Jung. This week I've been doing some more reading, and I found a really good quote that once you write something down on the page, you actually own it in a different way than just thinking about it. And so to me, that really struck a chord with me, that there's just something about putting it down that you're like saying, I'll stand behind that. When you hold on to sorrow, it infects our heart, mind, and body even. And so something about getting our greatest sorrows and our greatest joys out, we can rejoice over the good things, and we can reflect back on the bad things, oftentimes finding that those bad things weren't so bad after all. They actually maybe led to something unexpectedly good. And that's always a surprise to us, I think, that something bad, it's like the old turning lemons into lemonade, right? It's how you look at it. And when you're in the middle of a crisis or problem or circumstance you can't do anything about, you feel trapped, and your reptilian brain, as they say, reacts to the situation rather than your calmer, more mature human brain. Everyone's got a story, and the theme for this week is from my story to our story to the story. And our life is frittered away by details. Simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. Let our affairs be as, let me see if I can put the glasses on while I'm reading here. As 2 or 3, not 100 or 1,000, said Henry David Thoreau, great writer. So he's saying, how do we simplify things? That's the great thing about as you write out your memoirs and then look at them the next day or a week later, you look at it and say, well, that was a lot of fluff. I could say this more directly with cutting out half of what I said. And that's what the purpose of spending a little time reviewing what you've written and re-editing it, or having a friend with fresh eyes look at it and say, couldn't you say that in fewer words? Because people, they're, the culture we live in, let's get to the bottom line here. Let's not fluff it around with a bunch of side rabbit trails. Let's just stay on the point. So this is easier said than done. During the midlife years, which is what we're now moving into, the education college years, that's what we're starting on next week. This week, about halfway through, we're dealing with your career, marriage, and military or other things that children, etc. But during our midlife years, we have a lot of distractions and little time for reflection, and that's why elders, that's us, we folks 50, 60 and up, are so important to help us serve the youngers and help them to wake up and enjoy life despite the many pitfalls. I'm just amazed at how oftentimes our children, when they're in the middle of a crisis, they can't see anything but the crisis, not a thing. It's like all the good things in their life have all suddenly gone, and it's only this bad one thing, whether it's a relationship breakup or the loss of a job. They can't see beyond the next mountaintop or wall that's blocked them from going where they want. So the purpose of us being elders is that we've been through that, and we hit a block wall, and we either somehow in time figured out a way to go over it or around it, or sometimes the block wall was there to teach us something and we needed to just stop and listen. Moving from a childish, egocentric life and worldview to a more mature, inclusive mindset is a gradual process, sometimes taking many decades. One of the most important philosophers and futurists of our time, his name is Ken Wilber. He's written a book entitled A Brief History of Everything. So you can get an idea of just how comprehensive. I mean, that's a pretty audacious title, right? The Brief History of Everything. But if you read the book, he takes it from the macro all the way down to the holon, the smallest particle that science is telling us about now, and showing it how the whole universe is connected. There's nothing separate. It's just an illusion that you and I are not connected somehow. And but he points out that the vast majority, 60 to 70% of the world today, is either stuck in an either an egocentric, that's my story. My story is the only important story. I'm going to talk about my story everywhere I go, to everyone I talk. Or an ethnocentric worldview, which would be the story of my people, my tribe, my culture, whether we're doing it by race or by religion or whatever. That's the only one that's story. And that's the level of consciousness that many people stay stuck at for their whole life. They don't ever move into a larger consciousness of seeing how we fit into the whole story. And so Wilber says that following waking up, realizing, hey, I've been asleep. The next big step is surrendering to the process of growing up, which takes time, inner work, and frankly, a fair amount of letting go of small false self in pursuit of a larger true self. This requires some spiritual practices of connecting our head and our heart. So in midlife is when we begin to analyze these things sometimes, or hopefully, and we begin to move from my story to our story to the story, which he would call cosmocentric. We need all three stages, but ultimate fulfillment is only possible as we learn how to fit my small story into the larger the story of unconditional love toward everyone and everything. And that is something shared by all of the wisdom traditions, which boil everything down to, the golden rule, essentially. Love your neighbor as yourself, and if you really want to be radical, love your enemies, right? Okay, that takes you beyond yourself. How can you do that? There wouldn't be an enemy if you were, if you had no enemy, then you could love everyone. Every phase of life, from marriage to child rearing to navigating our career, gives us opportunities to make the choice to either change adverse circumstances or allow the circumstances sometimes to change us instead. This willingness to let go of our preconceived notion of success or rightness is a sign of maturity regardless of our age. So if elders do not show youngers how to do this in adverse situation, the question is, who will? Other youngers, there are a few people that wise up, or they say they're old souls because they've moved beyond themselves or their ethnic group, so to speak, into the bigger picture. New thought is sometimes called, through spiritual practices. But by and large, most youngers are still very wrapped up in building their identity. So the goal is to move eventually from my story to our story to the larger story. And writing out our life story is, my daughters are reading through my draft. I think I even sent it to you. I've made many, many improvements since I sent it to you already, including an introduction in the beginning, and rearranged some of the order of the things to make it flow more through a whole lifetime. Little things like that. But they're saying they're really learning a lot about before they were born, you know, what parents have been through, and even since they've been out on their own, things that they had no idea that I knew. But part of growing up means learning to embrace uncertainty and paradoxes, and you know, we've talked about that before. So anyway, I hope we're making progress on writing out these memoirs. If we do, again, 7 or 8 a week, we'll end up with about 50. I ended up with 51 for mine. I decided to take one out because it was duplicating another one and just consolidating it. So I had 52 and I went to 51. But then I added a little introduction at the end, and who knows, by the end of it I may add a conclusion at the end. You know, we all like stories that start with an introduction, and, you know, story and then conclusion. We'll see. My daughter wants to help me write the section when I was in the hospital, and I was so heavily sedated I don't remember what happened. And she says, I can help you with some of that. And so, you know, our kids and family can be great resources. And I was able to, I don't know, I inserted about 30 or 40 images and photos as well. And I encourage you to look through your old photo albums for that. Yeah, question.
What do you think about Prince Harry's story? Do you think it worth millions?
Worth
Prince
millions?
Harry's.
Yeah. You know, if you're into following the royals family, probably it would be an intriguing story. I mean, anybody's life that is that unique, and you know, there's so few people, there's so few countries that, you know, in the free world still run like a kingdom, you know, with a queen or a king. You know, I'm sure it's got interesting points. I've never been personally like that prone to following the royal family. I do like corgis. My daughter has a corgi, and of course that was the queen's dog, you know. So I'd be more interested to know about the royal pets than the lives of them, because they're so unique in culture. But you know, things could be learned, and I'm sure are you reading it, or are you thinking about it, or?
No, I haven't read it, but I just breezed through.
Breeze through it, yeah.
So one of the things about his story should be, because I haven't read it either, but his story is really hopefully more of the ethnic story,
Right.
and hopefully the story, because what the point about his and Meghan's relationship is that all of the countries that are in the Commonwealth, right, are actually black and brown, and there's nobody black and brown in the royalty.
Right.
And they want to make it clear that this is not okay, and that there needs to be an understanding of loving everybody.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it might have some really powerful pieces if they're mature enough to get there, you know, rather than being, you know, and they are doing a lot of work in global circles about making changes. So I'm just trying to tie it back to you.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation, that if in fact it shows an evolution of thought and, you know, embracing more of a inclusiveness rather than exclusiveness. The thing about royalty is that, you know, it's like the whole caste system, you know, is very much in place with royal families versus everyone else. But where in fact they're just regular people like everyone else. It's just by birth that they're anything special. So personally, I think we're moving away from the whole notion of people being special by bloodline versus what their thinking is and their lifestyle and their actions. But who knows how long it'll last. it's an interesting experiment. We decided here in America that it wouldn't be that way, so, but, yeah, so, one of the things that also in my reading I noticed is, in your memoirs, try to come up with, especially toward the beginning, sort of a grabbing story, something that really pulls people in to want to learn more. I started mine at first with just, does my name fit me? And I'm thinking, that's okay. But I decided then to put another one, like, what do I want to be when I grow up, in the front, and how I was influenced by television shows and different things, and like The Man from U.N.C.L.E., I wanted to be a spy, basically. When I watched Andy of Mayberry, I wanted to live in the country, and I went to school with Ron Howard, so Opie was a classmate, and but it made me want rural life versus living in a suburb of LA, and so I was thinking about what would I do, or when I watched Gilligan's Island, I thought about, it'd be cool to be stranded on an island and just live by your wits, and so these shows kind of, prompted you to think about what would life be like in those circumstances, and so I thought that was a little bit better, more interesting way to start than with what does my name mean, which, by the way, David is beloved, and Michael, which is my real first name, means messenger of God or something like that, like the angel Michael. So my conclusion is that my parents, Dad did a pretty good job. My pretty lovable guy to most people. So, so why don't we hear from? That's really all I had to cover. But I'd love to hear anybody's memoir that they've done that they want to share. Somebody that hasn't shared before. Did you share?
I think you shared, right? About have you shared? Have you shared? Are you ready to share?
No.
How about you? Have you shared?
Not yet.
How about you?
I'm
You
not
ready? You're not ready?
Okay, that's fine.
What I can do is say something about what you just mentioned about one of the most important things is, no matter where you are in your life,
Mm-hmm.
is that the first thing you say should grab the person.
Mm-hmm.
I was late coming to I didn't have your class from the very beginning, but I now have all the notes. And my first sentence was, I first met my father when I was 2 years old.
Mm.
And I go on to talk about how my mother and I were living in an apartment in Philadelphia. It was owned by my grandmother and grandfather. And how I was playing with little army men, and I just went into like what I was doing, and suddenly there was a knock downstairs, and you could hear these heavy footsteps coming up the stairs. And my mother had been very nervous, and I couldn't figure out why she was so nervous that day. And when she opened the door, there was a living statue of the little men that I was playing with. And she said to me, Jackie, this is your dad.
Mm.
And I was like, who is this guy? Where's he been? What does he do? And I talked about the fact that I didn't know anything about him, but I watched my mother's reaction when he walked into the room. And I came to see that, or came to tell myself that if my mother really likes this guy, then he must be okay. And so that was what I was fooling around with the first, because when I first came in, I thought I was going to go from when I was younger to when I retired. And then I found out that most people were going from the retirement back to when they were younger. But I felt that that was a good way to grab the people.
Sure,
So
absolutely.
I'll keep working on it, and maybe next time.
Was he in the Korean War or World War
It was in World War II,
II? Okay.
and he had his uniform on when he opened the door.
Wow.
My oldest brother had my father arrive on his second birthday. And the first night, he proceeded, my youngest brother, or my oldest brother, to take his crib apart, because there was a screwdriver left where he could reach it, you know, because they had put the screw, and he took the whole thing apart. And that was my father's introduction to my oldest brother.
That's
You know.
great.
So that must have been,
Mm-hmm.
you know, really an our story kind of thing,
Yeah.
right?
Well, that's wonderful. Yeah, I think that there's, again, I was, this is new, doing this class, so some people may find it easier, like the one gentleman was an engineer, to start with the beginning and go to the end. The only downside of doing it from the backwards forward that I found is that there was some duplication in my stories, because I told it, you know, more than one time from different life perspectives, different periods of time. And so it may be better to go from the front to the back. I just thought we'd start that way because I suggested it to Jenny, who runs the center. She says, yeah, I think that would be good. You know, but I didn't know how many people we might have that have memory issues, and I thought maybe it'd be easier to start with more recent and work backwards. So there's no right or wrong way to do it. You know, one of the other things that I stumbled onto this last week was a good definition, the difference between a memoir and an autobiography.
Oh, good.
So an autobiography is what happened in your life. A memoir is why what happened matters.
Mm.
And so, as I step back from mine and look, almost every chapter I did touch on why it matters that I did this or I went through that. And so that simply telling people what happened can be interesting and helpful, but it's even a little step beyond that if you say why it matters in the bigger picture. And so I just encourage you to keep that in mind as you're writing your memoirs, is what happened to you, how did it affect you, and why does it really matter to the person reading it? Is there something, a lesson, a life lesson that you learned that maybe could be helpful to them? And so,
Can I say something?
sure.
I'm very nervous about reading this, but I kind of want to just get your opinion as to whether this is good or not. You know,
Okay.
I don't know if I'm proceeding in the right way. I'm realizing things from you, like what you're saying today and what he said,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know if I'm, you know, I just don't know how I'm doing. So I'm thinking if you critique me, maybe I'll go ahead and read it. I do feel kind of nervous about reading
Yeah,
it.
no, there's no reason to be nervous. I mean, this is like a workshop. We're
This
like
is-
all helping each
I'm
other.
really very personal
Mhm.
in this book, you know.
Sure,
I'm
that's the
laying myself
idea.
out there for people, so
Yeah,
it's, you know,
yeah, you're vulnerable when you do that, and so,
but I'll read it. It's just
Yeah,
short.
good.
It's only half a page.
good.
Okay, this deals with like the middle of the book.
Mhm.
Since my daughter Connie was born when I was 17, she was a big part of my life always. But when she went off to college, it was really tough. I cried and laid in bed and got very depressed. I actually had to be treated with antidepressants. It was really tough. Then my son James, he had to go in the army over in Iraq and fight just shortly after high school. I missed him desperately. I would long so much for the phone calls that I got a few times a year. But after they both came home once in a while, everything would be okay. I would do really well, but it seemed like every time they would go or something different would happen, I would be sick mentally and emotionally, as I had been diagnosed with bipolar and depression and mania. I have tried to fight back with mental illness most of my life, but there are definitely triggers in my life that make it occur, some more often than others. I've been in and out of hospitals a lot of my life. It was really hard on my kids because they were younger. I would be in for 2 months at a time, but they have grown to be such wonderful adults. I am so proud of each of them. I have a lot of regrets of when I was a mother, that I wasn't good enough, that I didn't do a great job. But actually, they turned out to be good human beings, something to be proud of. Even though their father was an alcoholic and I was mentally ill. So how did these two people come out so wonderful? I don't know. I guess God must have been looking out for them and me too. Always, I truly believe that. My daughter and son are very successful in their careers. I have 2 wonderful grandchildren. They are 16 and 12. They are the light of my life. Even after all these years, I still battle with my illness sometimes, but I refuse to give up the fight. I fight, I go to the doctor, I take my meds, I do what I can to be well, to live in this world. It's not always easy. Sometimes the fear is overwhelming of what may or may not happen. But I'm doing my best to live a normal life, to be a good grandma, a good person, a good mother, everything I need to be, and I love God and I love life.
Great.
I'm touched.
Fantastic.
That's excellent. That is really excellent. I could
It
feel,
is.
I could feel your
Yeah.
pain.
Hey, yeah, I'm touched.
You're freaking me out.
Yeah, I'm absolutely touched.
I just don't feel like I'm, I don't know if I was heading in the right direction. So it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah.
Well, that's what a lot of my book is like, so.
Mhm.
And I have a lot to tell.
Well, I couldn't really feel your pain, but and also at the end, you were back at making progress forward.
Well, it's
And I-
something that I've, had to deal with for over 30 years, and I do lay myself out there. I don't tell everybody these things, but then I thought, well, if you're gonna write a book, you're gonna
Mhm.
lay it all out.
Yeah.
It is a big 30-year part of my life. I can't very well disguise that there's
Right.
nothing wrong.
No, that is the purpose of it. Like I say, that getting your memoirs out is healing to you, to the reader, because all of us have these pains, that regrets. Like I definitely wrote the one. If you could do something over again, what would you do? That's one of the prompting questions that struck me, because having 3 daughters when I was really young, and then having one later, I had so much time to spend with the one because I could focus on her, and I wasn't in the early stage of my career just struggling, and I felt bad that I couldn't do that with the other 3 daughters. But it's okay. It's hard when you're young to balance all the things that you have to juggle, the finances and the kids and the marriage, and where you're going to do next, how to get along. So sharing those things is healing, and you're getting, there's a power that you generate by getting your perspective out and on paper, and you.
It's kind of like almost a boost for my mental to get this out on
Mhm.
paper,
Right.
because otherwise it stays inside, and I think, God, I'm the only one, and
Mhm.
this has never happened to anybody else, and I'm alone, and getting it out on paper. People say, well, isn't that hard going through the past, because I have a lot of past things that are,
Mhm.
it's going to be uplifting too, believe me. I'm putting uplifting thoughts too, but
Mhm.
there was a lot of tragedy that happened in my life, and so they're like, why would you go back and think that over and everything? But I'm like, no, it helps me actually to kind of find a place for it, and then put it aside and say, I'm going on from there.
Right. Yeah, you've got it out, and now you can heal from it in some cases by sharing it. And I'm sure it's nice to know that God has our back when
Yeah.
we're raising kids and we blow it somehow.
Yeah.
Like during the period of years where I was cut off from my youngest daughter for about 5 years, I worried, substantially that she was going to make some wrong decisions based on her mother's perspective, and but as it turns out, she ended up being opposite of her mom, seeing that wasn't the right way to be, and so God had my back even when I was unable to do something about it. I worried excessively about it, and then after we were reunited, come to find that she's this very polite, very driven, very positive person, very unlike her mom, and I was just, thank God, that you had my back while I couldn't be there. So yeah, it's nice when you come to the point where you realize that, that things haven't gone perfect in your life, nor with anyone's life, and that you can glean from it and step back and still see how well they turned out, and we rejoice with you that they did turn out, because probably a lot of times you were worried about it, and
Yeah.
worry doesn't do anything really.
No, it
It's,
doesn't.
So I was gonna just comment that, it's really a gift to other people who have been through the same thing.
Mm.
And it's a gift to other people who have
Sure.
been close to people who have the same problem.
Right.
So that's,
Maybe
so,
it gives them a little insight to that person. Maybe.
yeah, and so when I said I was touched, I really was, because I had some people that had some situations, and I had to, it was really a tough time for me as an observer and as a participant in their lives. So you don't know exactly what your words will contribute to anyone's story. And again, that's the larger story, right?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
I don't hear too good even
Okay.
with a hearing aid, but I think I remember last class, maybe I'm wrong, you mentioned most people, when they look back on their life, they think they had the best time in their life in their 20s and 70s.
Right.
Can you explain why you think that is?
Well, I think in your 20s, your whole life is ahead of you. And so you have the ultimate optimism about what your life can be. It can be anything. And if you have a dream of being this, you have all the time in the world to do it. And nothing can really hold you back if you have. Now, some people feel held back because they don't have the money for it, or they don't have various things. But many times you'll find a way, one way or another. If you're supposed to do something, you'll find a way. In your late 60s, early 70s, you've sort of given up the childish dreams of what you could be, because you're already toward the final chapters of your life. It may be still 10, 20 years, but the point is you're content. So your happiness level in your late 60s and 70s is high for a different reason. Not because your whole life's before you, but because you've had dreams, you've seen in some ways they've failed, but you've still gone on and you have accomplished things in your life that you're happy with. And so you can be content even if you didn't accomplish everything in your late 60s and 70s for a different reason. Your reason is that you let go of your idea of being a rock star, let's say, if you play guitar or something like that. Well, I wasn't good enough to do that, but I can play a few songs at Christmas or with a group of friends or to a church or, at a nursing home or whatever, and that's good enough. I'm content with that. I'm okay. Not a rock star, but that wasn't meant to be, because, it's only a very small percentage of people, and it's more who you know than how good you are these days. Got to know people, to move up in that. So that's the main difference, I think. In the early life, you've got your whole life ahead of you, and that gives you great encouragement and great happiness. Later in life, you're content that things didn't go perfect and exactly what you wanted when you were younger, but you're not so bad after all. You're content with your life. You're still breathing. You still have years in front of you that you can possibly dream again. That's one of the reasons why, instead of retirement, which means retreating in life, I say we go for re-inspirement. Okay, that way we get re-inspired to do something different, something new, because we have more time to do it and more wisdom than we've ever had. And I mean, the old saying, if I knew now if I knew then what I know now, but that's not the way it works. we only know what we know by going through doing things wrong and then learning the lesson. So.
I have one more question for you. I read someplace, and I want to know if you agree or disagree with it. Most people can be as happy as they want to be or they could be as miserable as they wanna be. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do.
Or disagree?
Absolutely.
I think it's actually Mark Twain that said, most people are about as happy as they decide to be.
Yeah.
And I think that's saying the same thing.
Another thing I read, I found interesting, they say usually the firstborn are more successful than the rest of the people who born. Is that true or false?
I think that there may be some truth, there's probably some truth to it, because everyone's looking to them as a model, and so there's a little bit more pressure on the oldest. I don't know, I only have one brother, so I was the oldest, and I might have had a little bit more drive, but my brother's quite successful too, so in a different way, and very different personalities. In fact, we were so unlike each other that people couldn't believe we were brothers, with only 18 months difference between us. And so I think that you can overcome, you can be the middle child and still become a great achiever, or the youngest. I think there are more other factors than just your birth order, but I think that there's a certain built-in, I don't say pressure, but expectation that the firstborn will be the first one to do a lot of different things. First one educated, first one with a job, first one, that maybe aspires to, having a better life maybe than his parents or whatever. So, anyway, are you the firstborn? Yeah, okay.
I know I'm more successful than my only brother.
Oh, you are?
He's a failure.
Oh, is he? Well, you should have heard what he said about you. Success and failure, how do we measure it? Do we measure it by wealth? Do we measure it by things? Some people measure it more by relationships. How are my relationships with my family, my friends, my children, my grandchildren, etc. Some people, by the standard of wealth, are not very successful, but yet they're very much loved and have wealth that extends far beyond temporal things. I've heard it said that the only thing that you really take with you when you leave are those relationships. You're not going to take any of the stuff with you, so why get so attached to it, But yet it's just human nature to like comparing my stuff with their stuff and this and that. Yeah, sometimes what appears to be failure can be truthfully a success.
So I have a comment.
Yeah.
I think when we were talking about the 20s and the 70s being the best years, maybe at those points in time you realize what your possibilities are, and that people really live into their possibilities. And there's whole courses about living into your possibility, because really you don't do anything unless it's possible for you to do it. And you have to figure out, like if I was going to get up, I would have to decide, I'm going to get up now. I have a possibility of standing up, but I have a possibility of doing this or doing that or that.
Right.
And you're so closed in during the middle of your life because the amount of knowledge and energy and craziness that is in your life, just because it is your life, is so controlling that you forget about possibilities.
Yeah, exactly. Good point. Like in the beginning of life, you don't have as many things cluttering up your vision, and toward, after you've been through all of that, you don't have as many things cluttering you up too. So I think it's a matter of focus, and also, the scripture says, as a man or woman thinketh in his heart, so is he. And so if you think that you can do something, that's the beginning of you being able to do it. And when you're young, we have these visions and dreams, and they push us forward. Later in life, we have a little more wisdom, but we still are able to dream again and reinvent and some of the greatest inventions have been done by people in their 70s and 80s, and the great things that have been accomplished. So the notion that, I mean, there's a little bit of ageism going on in the United States where everything's compartmentalized, and let's put all the seniors here and all the kids here and I think that the intergenerational model is actually, we're coming full circle back to where that is seen as the healthiest, where young children, their parents and grandparents and maybe even great-grandparents are all closer in proximity, sometimes living together, and able to interact, because that was the model for 200 years in our country before we went into the 60s and 70s and everybody began following their jobs all across the country and getting split up as families. So I think that we seniors, elders, have some great dreams and visions to share. It's not just the young, that have these visions. And there's a good website called Modern Elders, and they do workshops with people in their 50s, 60s, etc. And they're trying to encourage people to, for example, new startup internet companies, explain why they will do so much better if they have an elder in the circle, the inner circle of the leadership, to be able to step back and give a broader perspective to. He uses the example because he was with Airbnb, and he had run a boutique hotel in San Francisco, and so he brought some of his wisdom from running something small like that into the Airbnb experience, and it helped them tremendously. He was substantially younger. He was dealing with people in his 20s, he was in his 40s or 50s, and carved out a niche for himself as a great person to bounce these new ideas off. Because if you ever talk to kids, they got all the energy in the world, but not always a lot of understanding about the repercussions of doing something that we can get with time and going through it, or maybe having done it and it not worked, and then we know. So there's a movement afoot to see, reconnect the generations, let's say. And Mark Friedman, I think I alluded to it a week or so ago with his book, The Big Shift, explains just how many of us there are. It's a huge, huge block of people, because the baby boomers were the largest generation now moving into retirement, and there's all this pool of great knowledge and wisdom that can either just sit around and clip coupons and play golf all day, or figure out how to give back. And that's really a great calling, to be able to do what we can to give back, and possibly even supplement retirement income, which, who couldn't use that? So only about a third of retirees are self-sufficient, believe it or not. There's 2/3 that need to continue working part-time to supplement their income, depending on what level of lifestyle they want to live at. So it's for some people not really a option. It's a necessity to reinvent yourself and to remain in the workforce. And so, yeah. What else? Yes.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
I'm a naturalized American.
Okay.
And I was always wondering, I never asked anybody else before, but I feel comfortable in this case. Why do men in America have to get down on their knees before they get married?
Before they get married?
Why do the man has to get down to his knees before they get married?
Oh, I think it's...
How did that start?
Oh boy.
That's a fascinating thing to research.
Yeah, I don't really know. I know it's certainly a symbolic realization that the woman is really the queen of the household, and so you might as well start bowing before you get married, and realize that so that you get used to it throughout your marriage.
This is not to acknowledge that the woman is the boss in the marriage.
So that's where the role of the goddess versus the role of the god is a whole nother conversation, you know?
Yeah, I think we're moving toward a more maternalistic culture from being so heavily paternalistic for so long that there's there's a backlash on it. So, that'd be something to look up. So maybe we'll Google it and come back.
Yeah, that's kind of
Good
the
answer.
authoritarian idea versus the loving idea.
Yeah,
There's that too.
right.
And it's the authoritarian person then saying, okay, I'll go with glove. You know, there's a lot of things, a lot of ways. That would be an interesting.
So you're
piece
from
to write
Britain,
on.
right? From Britain, right?
I'm a genuine honky from Hungary,
From Hungary?
Yeah.
Okay, from
and
Hungary.
I'm always hungry.
Oh, it is lunchtime now, yeah.
Speaking of which,
But they don't
Can
get
we
up.
have a lunch soon?
I'm just curious, in your culture there in Hungary, do they not get down on their knee and ask, or do they?
Say that again?
In your native background, do the men get down on their knee and ask for marriage, or no?
No,
No?
I got married a few times, but I never get down on,
Okay.
never get down on my knees.
All right.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, well, we won't hold that against you. All right, well,
Keep
another
writing.
fun class. Look forward to next week. Keep writing, write, get it done, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time.